Another good exercise that I did when I was an FBI analyst that I'm now doing in my business is looking at sort of what's called a red hat analysis. So looking
Hmm.
at it from sort of the opposite perspectives, I use my Akashic Records experiences and expertise as a new per se intelligence source, and that's how I'm describing it because of my intelligence uh, background, working in the
Yeah.
intelligence community. And to me, it's just another data source framework that I could share that I use on myself and then when I'm helping others, which is it's a 4-step process. One, start to recognize the logical and intuitive signals that are coming to you. Second step is to interpret them in a state of calm and presence. Three, the third step is to align all those different data points into a path that really resonates and makes sense, and then start to act.
So that's a quick taste of what's ahead. In this conversation, Adam Dickinson and I dig into a friction point that traps so many corporate and institutional refugees. How do you position expertise that doesn't fit neatly into traditional boxes without sanding down the parts that actually make you valuable? Adam went from writing classified threat assessments for the FBI to reading the Akashic Records. We explore how he bridges these two worlds, how he uses intelligence frameworks like Red Hat analysis to audit his own business, and why combining logic with intuition can be a real competitive advantage for solopreneurs. This is Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm Nikhil. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil. My next guest spent 15 years analyzing threats for the FBI before discovering the Akashic Records. And now he's blending those two worlds to show that intuition and intelligence can actually work in the same room. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nikhil. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and chat with you today.
I'm very excited for our conversation. So let me start by asking you now, you mentioned that something happened about a decade ago that sent you inward towards meditation. Now,
Mhm.
without getting into any personal details you're not comfortable with, what was it about that experience that showed you that the analytical, critical thinking side of your FBI work wasn't enough anymore? What was missing?
Yeah, sure. So for me, my professional career at the time, when I was still at the FBI, it excited me on a point where I really like puzzles. And from my day to day during that moment, it really fulfilled me. But when I would go home, I had uh, a rift in my psyche, in my human experience at that time, and it just didn't. The logical side didn't serve me as well as I had hoped. Everything was sort of unhinged, and I didn't recognize who I was, what I was really doing, what was the point. And so I needed that more deeper connection to myself and my surroundings. So at that point, I started to go inward more and connected to myself better through meditation, through mindfulness practices, and pausing when I could take a moment to breathe. But it was super challenging in a sense of everything I had learned up to that point on how to cope really was not helping and not supporting, and I needed a different outlet to keep moving forward.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, especially given what you were doing, I'm sure, which we won't get into discussing any classified information. But
Yeah.
let me ask you how you even came across the Akashic Records. I mean, it just feels like those two universes would never collide, as we were sort of saying it before we started recording.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic point. They are quite separate worlds. And for me, when I first got introduced to the Akashic Records, I was at a point where I was looking and searching for my purpose, one, which is to teach and lead others how to integrate logic and intuition to make aligned decisions. And secondly, I was also looking for a tangible way for me to cope. And for me, I like tools and frameworks. It's my more logical side coming out where I know I can have some kind of certainty on next steps in my decision making. So, with those two things in mind, my purpose, one, and I was looking for a tool to figure it all out. And when I was introduced to the Akashic Records, to me, it sounded like a treasure map, which I generally, when I'm working with clients and describing it to friends as well, I describe the Akashic Records as your soul's energetic library of information. And I know you've had another guest that was also an Akashic Records reader. And through certain approaches to the records, you can access question or answers to your deeper questions. And that really resonated with me at the time, and is right before COVID came coming into my life as well. So I had a tool that was readily available and that could help me figure out my purpose. So it just made sense to me logically too. I was starting to question, would this thing, this resource that I came across really benefit me? Because it really wasn't, to be honest with you, very spiritual at the time. It was growing and I wasn't really honing in on my gifts as I could have, but to me it just seemed like, yeah, a treasure map.
Yeah.
That you had this pathway that you could navigate things, and I'm like, well, that's an unlock. Who wouldn't want that? And it kept going, and it just made sense, and it worked.
Yeah, you know what I love about that, Adam, is I think we're so programmed to follow one side or the other side of our brain, right? And we were
Mm,
sort of taught to either be analytical or the other side. And it's almost like the East and West will never sort of meet. And I think there's much greater sort of value. And like you said, I love the description of the treasure map, but to find greater treasures, if you combine both sides, it's not like you have to do one or the other, right? Or lean too heavily on one or the other. You can use all the tools at your disposal to find sort of the answers and the depth that I feel a lot of people are missing today in the world.
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I was talking with a friend actually yesterday where he had mentioned that everything in the world generally has changed so much that it's hard to find any kind of footing or reference point on how to keep moving forward because everything's so different now, and it's just hard to navigate things.
Yeah, and the pace of change too. I mean, even with AI, it's like every time you blink, something new has happened, and the earth is shattered again. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so take me back now to this year, the moment when you decided to opt into the deferred resignation program, right? Now, you'd been at the FBI for 15 years, your only career ever, you told me. What was going through your head? What were you most afraid of?
Oh, Nikhil, I don't know. Where should I start? I think it was a mixture of a couple things. First, I looked at, and this is, one framework that I could share that I use on myself and then when I'm helping others, which is it's a four-step process. One, start to recognize the logical and intuitive signals that are coming to you. Second step is to interpret them in a state of calm and presence. Three, the third step is to align all those different data points into a path that really resonates and makes sense, and then start to act. So with those, that's my sort of four-step framework, what I call my intologic method. And in the beginning, when I was starting to think through when I wanted to pivot, or if I did, I thought about, okay, what else could I do at the FBI that I haven't done before? Looking at it from a career growth perspective. What resonated, what didn't, what sounded exciting. And then once I had that answer, I also started to think, how could I translate my skills? Because I don't know if it's really hit home enough or clarified that individuals who are coming from the government, especially if you're working in classified information, it's hard to figure out what your skills could translate to because everything in your head is classified. And
Yeah.
so I had that block, and so I really tried to reframe what I could do with myself, to be honest with you. And to me, the unlock there was, on a day-to-day basis, I'm doing analysis that is guiding FBI agents, that is guiding uh, diplomatic officials, that is guiding military officers, and so forth. So in a way, I'm like, oh, well, let me just do that, but for the everyday layperson, and use my analytic abilities and intuitive abilities, which I really wasn't bringing into work as much as I could have, but doing it when I started to figure out my next steps. And once I have that sort of breaking point, I knew that I really wanted to use my experiences at the FBI and the skills I had developed to help others. And at that point, I was really excited to try to come up with a game plan for next steps, and things just kind of uh, started to fall in place where the program, as you had mentioned, the deferred resignation program, was announced, and I looked at it. I weighed the pros and cons, of course, and then I also went into my Akashic records to confirm that I was on the right path for me and that made sense for me. So that's really the short version.
Yeah.
Happy to elaborate, but I started off, one, just making sure I was in the right frame of mind, and then using my intuitive abilities kind of confirm that and clear up a path for me going forward.
Yeah, no, I love that, and the framework sounded very Star Trek to me, but we'll touch on that a little later.
Sure. Yeah,
I have
sure.
some
Happy to.
insider knowledge on that front. But and also you're right though, because when you have a high set of highly specialized skills, it's very difficult to translate that, right? But even if you don't, there are a lot of solopreneurs I know that struggle with moving even from the corporate world and understanding what skills they carry forward and sort of what expertise that they've built and how to apply that. And sometimes it can be something you don't even realize you have, right? It's just something you help people with in your free time that turns into a business. So I think I love the idea of the framework and sort of using that to diagnose and then determine, right, before you take the leap.
Yeah, it helped me, and I often try to describe it in different sequences, but yeah, it's a game changer for sure.
So so the other thing I wanted to ask you is you're a few months into your solopreneurship now. Now, so walk me through the first few weeks after you left the FBI, right? Not the Instagram reel, but the real stuff. What surprised you? What shocked you? What excited you?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, I had so many answers to your question. I would start off with what surprised me was the amount of reactions to my first LinkedIn post ever. I waited to post just because of the mindset and the culture of where I was coming from. We had certain responsibilities where I didn't feel comfortable necessarily communicating messages when I still worked at the FBI. So a real big surprise and shift for me was when I finally did, and pulled off that band-aid, so to speak. And the reactions that I got were all very positive and encouraging and fantastic. And then as time progressed, the encouragement sort of dwindled. And then I was like, okay, well, this is it. It's time to focus and start taking action on what you had planned for so long. And what I started to realize is that I needed to quickly create a support system for myself. So, for
Yeah.
example, I learned and reached out to people that knew how to post on LinkedIn and how to market yourself, how to create awareness of who you are and what you're doing. And I'm still working on this, but talking to people on LinkedIn is challenging. But and also looking at it from internal business operations side, like what technology do I use? What frameworks and standard operating procedures do I need to keep track of? Those sorts of things. And that was also a big learning curve that I did as an analyst at the FBI, but not on the scale that I am now, and especially keeping track of everything has been super key. And with all that, for me, it was going from, just to kind of close this thought out, wow, this is amazing, to, oh, okay, sort of a slump, to, I need to create some sort of stability and momentum, to refining those systems and actions, and then trying to create some kind of normalcy. And that's, I would say, where I'm at this point.
Yeah, and I'd say you're ahead of the game, and I appreciate your honesty because you're right. We all sort of go through that. If there was a drawing I could do in terms of the euphoria, then the hump, then the reality setting, and then sort of like understanding, you're going to have to wear a lot of different hats,
Right.
and there's a lot of new skills you're going to have to learn. And like you said, I think it's also very important to sort of find your tribe, right? Because you can have a lot of well wishers and supporters who are not on this journey, who don't necessarily understand what the day-to-day entails. So it's very important to find people like the Boost Solo community, for example, where you will find people who are exactly on the same path, and have either navigated or about to navigate some of the things that you're experiencing. So, and also, I was always upset of the fact there's no sort of handbook for the solopreneur, right? There are a million books on how to be an entrepreneur, as in the VC route and startup life, but not really on how do you take a set of skills and turn it into and build a business around your life, not the other way around, I always say. So
Yeah. Can you work on that, Nikhil? I think that would be really helpful.
I'm working on it. In fact, I'm working on my first book. So
Oh,
um,
good.
yeah. So I want to. It's a good segue into brand building now too. You touched on that a little bit in terms of marketing yourself, positioning yourself. So, in my mind, you have a very unique positioning challenge, right? That it's one of the most unique ones I've seen. You told me people get the FBI thing, but when I bring in the Akashic records, they go, "What?" So,
Hmm.
how have you been navigating that tension? Have you ever sort of been tempted to dial one side back just to make life easier?
Yeah, that's another great insight point that you're hitting on. And I've gotten some differing advice and suggestions. I remember I was talking with one individual who helps new founders communicate what they do. And he had suggested for me to sort of, I won't say hide, but have my Akashic Records expertise be secondary when I'm positioning and branding. And, I acknowledge where he was coming from, and I appreciate that. But for me, the way I'm describing it right now, and it could change, is that I use my Akashic Records experiences and expertise as a new per se intelligence source, and that's how I'm describing it because of my intelligence uh, background, working in
Yeah.
intelligence community, and to me, it's just another data source. So you could think of it as on the logical side, if you're talking to someone in the security community, you could look at it, oh, it's just information that was on the internet, but it's from a source that you can't see necessarily unless you're trained hear, touch, feel, and so forth. So at the moment, I'm sort of combining my intelligence related work with, or like that sort of framing with the Akashic Records, because it's just a way to integrate separate data sources. And that's, as an analyst, what we were taught is to look at the different areas that you can glean information to help you come to a conclusion. And that's really what it's all about for me, and how, and what I teach clients, and what I message as part of my brand is that, to me, it's all about the decision making process that looks at all the different parts that could help you out. And if you aren't looking necessarily at the intuitive side, you're leaving out a lot of useful and beneficial and aligned information.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you're right. It is tough, right? Because people don't know what they don't know. And obviously, if you have to spend time sort of explaining what you do before you can even get to how you can help them, then you sort of lose a little bit. But it's sort of, but I love the way you sort of put it together. It's like signals intelligence and human intelligence. You take all the different data sources and you sort of put them together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you one thing, which is the truth is people really care more about the transformation you can provide for them than how the sausage gets made. So whether it's called Akashic Records or any something else, they're going to care less about how you do it and much more about what you do and the impact it'll have on them and how you get them from point A to point B. So
Sure.
that's one thing. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you also, which is sort of in a similar vein, is you also call yourself a future self strategist. Now, you clearly love it and it feels true to you. But I'm curious, what's the typical reaction when you introduce yourself that way? And how often do you find yourself explaining what that means before the conversation moves to what they actually need?
Oh my gosh, Nikhil, you have such great questions. I've gotten mixed reactions. I have a close friend who I would say he does communications work, and he totally gets it from a vantage point of guiding an individual to their next better version of themselves. But I've also talked to other individuals about, like, when I'm in a networking event, for example, and I'm trying to do my pitch, which I'm still working on. And I say, yeah, something to the effect of, I'm a future self strategist helping at the moment US federal workers transition their careers, blah, 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 blah. And I do get a reaction like, huh, what does that mean? And I think there's a pause moment where people are still trying to process that. And I considered that reaction from individuals, but I know, like, the term future self is used in literature because I think it was Benjamin Hardy, I think is his name, who wrote a book on it, on the term future self and thinking through that. So I was like, well, if someone had written a book on it, then it must be out in the press and on the internet. So I thought it could land in some fashion. But the way I approach it, and it's a mixture of what I mentioned earlier about guiding FBI agents, I'm essentially guiding them to be their future selves and helping craft assessments that would guide what the United States future self would be. And I also look at it from an Akashic Records point of view, which is an ability to tap into the past, present, and future scenarios. And so I'm like, okay, there's some overlap here. So I was like, it just felt right. And to me, what I'm doing is essentially guiding individuals to their future state. And that's really what I enjoy.
Yeah, no, I get that. And you're right. From a branding positioning standpoint, it makes sense. But I think one of the things, there are always two sides to that coin, because you also have to look at audience understanding, right? You don't want, the longer it takes for someone to understand, things like what you do and who you are, the longer it takes for you to get to how you can help them and sort of close the deal, if you like, right? Because then can sometimes lose people. But that's all part of the learning, I think. It's not, right or wrong or good or bad. Um, so the other thing I wanted to ask you also was, you sort of mentioned that a little bit earlier too about LinkedIn posting, and you also told me it takes you forever to sort of figure out what to post on LinkedIn, right? So just take me inside that moment. What's the internal tug of war? Like, what do you
Oh,
first write versus what actually gets published?
yeah. Oh my gosh. Um, Let me pause just for a moment. I think so. I'm coming from a background, as mentioned before, is for over 15 years writing intelligence related pieces and publications, which is essentially name your conclusion on your first sentence and then provide supporting evidence. Whereas now I have to reframe that logical sequencing into, my first line is not necessarily what's most important to the reader, but my first line is what's going to catch your attention first. So that
Right.
hook. And I'm like, who cares? Like, but for me, I'm still processing the attention grabber, if you will, for the reader. and what's going to resonate, what's appropriate, what's a best way to phrase it. And so when I'm approaching what to message, it's, from what I've been learning, it's focusing on the hook or the first line to grab your attention, which for me, I'm still coming to terms with on, is this really helping individuals? And then also, what's my strategy with the message, which is, do I want it to be more top of funnel and letting folks getting to know me? Do I want to do middle of funnel and having it more best practices or educational based? Or even, here and there, bottom of funnel, and having a message that's going to convert in some way? So I think about that. I think about, how long do I want it to be? I also think about, do I want it to be introspective? Do I want it to be inspiring? Do I want it to be a thought leadership piece in a way? And all these different aspects about it, kind of, as an analyst or a previous FBI analyst, I'm like, wow, there are so many different ways to tell your story. And I'm like, how do people not get overwhelmed with this?
Right.
And then it's, generally you need to tell it in a story like way, and I'm like, I am straight to the point, or I have been trained straight to the point. Tell us what's going on, give us the facts, and that's it. So I'm having to be a little bit more creative about it, but generally it's figuring out my strategy with my message, writing it, and then taking a moment to pause and then editing it to make sure, does this make sense? Or is this, what's the grammar look like? If that even matters in social, LinkedIn posts. But yeah, it's a process and it takes me a while.
Yeah, it sounds like you're expending a lot of time and energy right now on that. But I also think that's part of the learning curve, though, right?
Yeah.
I, I think the other problem, and maybe you've experienced this or not, there's everyone you talk to will give you a different spin on what you should be doing, right? And
Mhm.
I can tell you for myself, that's where I started too, and then I finally just threw all of that out, and I just sort of found my voice, right? And it's like building a muscle. So now I don't really care about the hook. I don't really care about the middle structure. But I mean, it follows, that type of structure where I'm obviously solving a problem, answering a question, sharing something of value. But
Right.
the last piece is what I would always focus on, right? Are you sharing something of value to the
Right.
audience? And the rest of it is, like you said, is just more about doing it in your voice and not trying to replicate, a Justin Welch or a Sile Bloom, who are brilliant at creating content, but they're
Mm.
creating content from their voice, right? Their perspective, their lived experience.
Right.
So I don't know if that helps or confuses more, but
Yeah, I'd say it helps, and at least it gives me some gratitude and appreciation for where I've come thus far, and where I can expect. Just following in your footsteps, I think that would be a good thing to just help me relax a little bit more.
yeah, it's like you can't break the rules until you learn them. I remember someone once telling me that, right? Then you know where you can paint outside the lines. So it's
Right.
sort of a little bit like that. You're on the right path. It just, we all have to go through that sort of baptism by social media fire, right? Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the hamster wheel, which I do not love. Um, so the slightly different question now. What's one story or insight you've been sitting on that would resonate with burnt out federal workers, but you haven't posted yet? And
Oh,
what's holding you back?
yeah. Ooh. Well, funny enough, I haven't posted it yet, but it's on my queue for probably this coming week, which is, it's more of an introspective piece on, am I really reaching my target reader? And am I providing what's helpful in my posts? It's like a mixture of a, what's going on with me personally, and also maybe seeking feedback. Hopefully I can get some good information in the comments, but it will be a short piece on, essentially, am I supporting you in some way? Have you gotten any value of what I shared? Uh, a little bit of an SOS, kind of like help me in a way, sort of just, the unfiltered version between you and me. And I am hoping that I can get some sort of response that shows me that I am doing what I am meant to do and what my purpose is and what excites me. And so that's coming up fairly soon. It's definitely in the queue, but I haven't talked about it yet. And I'm kind of curious what people will say.
Yeah, it is interesting, and that I think that is also part of the journey, right? Because I mean, what I found is people resonate much more strongly with posts about myself, right? Versus, and there, it's again, but it has to be. And I'm not suggesting you post your food and your breakfast and like generationally maybe that's okay, but at least I'm not that generation. But
Yeah.
talking about my recent trip to India and how I kind of handled it, but those kinds of things really resonate with people, more than sort of a classic advice on how a coaching technique or a framework. Because I think people just sort of see themselves. I don't have the answer to this other than it's one of those old adages where it's like people always want to be in your shoes. So when you share something that's fun and exciting, they celebrate with you, but they also think, wish that was me. So I think those posts tend to resonate more strongly. But again, it's part of the journey, right? And I've found that it's taken me a year and a half to be more comfortable sharing. I'm not Gen Z. Hopefully, I never will be. But I've certainly shaved off some of my Gen X weight and anchors as I've evolved.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm a millennial, so I am one thing I'm trying to maybe shine a good light on is posting more photos of myself. I haven't really done that as much. So selfies aren't really like a go-to thing for me. So it's
Yeah.
one thing I'm gonna do fairly soon, but I haven't done as much.
Yeah, I did my first one after I had a podcast guest who challenged me to do a selfie. So that was first, and I've never looked back, much to
Oh,
my wife's chagrin. Yeah, it's like
yeah,
it's
that's good
yeah.
because it's definitely not natural for me.
No, I don't think it is for anyone who's not born in Gen Z, right? Millennials probably are closer to Gen X that way than they are to Gen Z. So,
Sure.
and it's just conditioning, right? I mean, it's like they came out with cell phones attached to their hips, so they're a different generation.
Mm.
Um, so now, I want to move gears a little bit again. So you spent 15 years recognizing patterns, anticipating threats, analyzing complex situations. So how are you applying those FBI skills to building your business? Can you give me a specific example of how your analyst training showed up in this solopreneur journey?
Yeah. Oh my God, you have such great questions. I love it. Yes. So first, I do this exercise with my client, or one of the exercises is I did what's called a key assumptions check, which is essentially just evaluating what your assumptions are in the moment. So
Yeah.
it helps sort of reframe your mindset and the direction that you get additional data sources in a way. So I first did that to make sure, what do I know, what do I not know, and then at some point figure out what is the even things that I may come into experience later on. But I wanted to make sure, okay, I have marketing, a way to go to market, do sales and offers. So that's like the core sort of foundation. And then after I had those assumptions fairly evaluated and outlined, I then did another technique, which I analyzed some different hypotheses. So I did what's called an analysis of competing hypotheses to figure out, uh, did I want to go down this path with posting on LinkedIn, or did I want to go start on Substack first? Because I've also gotten sort of suggestions in what I've been reading and researching that Substack is also a good platform. Another sort of hypothesis that I was considering was, oh, Nikhil, you really caught me pretty fresh. What bank do I want to use? Do I want to do traditional banking? Do I want to do more um, startup oriented banks, and so on and so forth? So then I did that exercise, and then actually the sort of, I don't want to say final, but another good exercise that I did when I was an FBI analyst that I'm now doing in my business is looking at sort of a what's called a red hat analysis. So looking
Mm-hmm.
at it from sort of the opposite perspective. So I often, right now, I'm, to be honest with you, having trouble talking on LinkedIn, like in the direct messages. And so I've done some red hat analysis as if I was the client and sort of analyzing my own conversations, which, oh my gosh, it's interesting. And so I'm trying to improve the way I talk and my communication style. And it's been pretty helpful. I'm also always eager to understand how others talk on LinkedIn and so forth. But these are just three techniques that I've done in my business, and then I also use with clients to help them figure out their next steps. And it's been really helpful, and ironically helped me feel safe and stable during the entire process.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I love the red hatting because I don't think we do enough of that, right? We don't really understand sort of the the fail safes, well, not the fail safes, but sort of the bugs in the system, right? Which
Mm,
we all have. So because we always look at the wins and we sort of break that down, but we don't look at the things that don't work necessarily and closely enough to see what could have worked better always.
right.
Um, so you spend a lot of time just talking about the analysis and how you sort of break things down. Is there a decision you recently made by intuition alone, and what did it teach you?
Oh yeah, yes I did. So last week I joined a community of business owners, and it was right around the holidays, so, or at least in the United States, around the Thanksgiving holiday. So, as you could probably be aware, assume there were a lot of deals and options to take advantage of. So, I was on a live call with someone. It was an event, and I was encouraged by a friend of mine who was also on the event that I should probably sign up to be a part of the community. And before going into this event, I knew logically that everything seemed on par, that it would be a good decision. But right now in my business journey, I'm trying to be mindful of my expenses and all that. So uh, the opportunity came up where the host was like, "Okay, I'm offering this op- uh, opportunity for you to join at this particular price, and it's only going to last while you're on the call." And I'm like, "Oh, of course it is." In my head, I'm like, "Great." So there it was under a time limit, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I need to figure this out." So logically, I knew where my red line was. I'm like, I'm not going over, this price or whatever, but I needed to make sure that this decision would be in alignment for me going forward. S- So with, maybe 20 minutes left in the call, I got off the call. I did a short meditation just to be grounded because my nerves were up. And so I went into my Akashic records, asked various questions, because to me, the the key aspect of going into your records is the art of the question. And it also helps as an analyst going into your records as well. So you can look at the situation from different perspectives, which I also do with my clients as well. So I went into my records, asked various questions, I got an answer, I double checked and triple checked, still got the same answer, and then I made a decision. So yeah, I often, if logically you're not sure what to do next, my next sort of fail safe, if you will, and trusting yourself is going into the Akashic records and finding an answer that way. And I've done it many times from should I go to this restaurant, or should I travel to this location, or name your decision, and it always turns out well in the end.
Yeah, and that's going back to what you said earlier. It's like you have something like that in your toolkit, why not use it, right? Because we can't always rely. I mean, even reporters never rely on a single source, right?
Mm,
When they're reporting a story, and I'm sure when you're doing a threat analysis, you're hardly going to rely on one source. So
right.
I don't know why in life we tend to do that, but I think there's a lot of merit in the way you sort of approach it. And I hope people listening will sort of also pay attention to the fact that businesses can be built on logic and intuition, right? You have to have. I think that's the best of both worlds that helps you get to where you need to go. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely helpful, and when you don't have the information that you need from one source or the other, you can pivot and rely on the other one.
yeah, absolutely. So the other thing I wanted to touch on was the FBI is structured, hierarchical, 9 to 5. Now you're in total freedom or chaos, depending on the day. I know. What systems or routines have you built to keep yourself on track? And tell me honestly, what's not working yet?
Right, yeah. So the systems that I have developed to keep me on track is I generally try to have themed days. So for example, for me, Mondays I'm working with clients, and then Tuesday through Thursday I use as networking, catch up, random meetings that pop up, any sort of opportunity that arises. And then my Fridays are more of my admin strategy, writing my LinkedIn posts, those sorts of the more the creative side that I have to really have focused work. And then what I've also done is set up my day to really position me to take charge and get things done. So what I mean by that is I'm more of a morning person. So I often go to the gym in the mornings, and then when I'm done, I start more or less more of the work that needs to be done and go from there. And I often schedule my meetings like this in the afternoon and the evenings.
Yeah.
But the things that aren't really working that I'm still trying to figure out is creating a system or framework where I'm maintaining the posting, I'm maintaining chatting with people, I'm maintaining having a live conversation, and then I'm maintaining, closing a deal, and then they go into the onboarding process and so on and so forth. But I haven't been able to just yet create enough momentum to create leverage where I can step back and figure out what's going to be my goals and KPIs for quarter one of 2026.
Right.
Because I'm still trying to keep the operations going.
Yeah.
And so right now, yeah, the system or framework that I am slowly picking away at is how to figure out how to do more long-term strategy, because right now it's been more short-term, in the moment, or the next week, or the next few weeks, sort of planning and organizing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I think that's sort of part of the journey of solopreneurship, right? Because we sort of you take off one pair of handcuffs only to find that you potentially have put on another pair, depending on how you traverse that journey. Because I mean, you could end up working 24/7, right? Which you
Yeah.
never worked in any sort of corporate or federal job. So, and again, I don't think there's a right way to do it, Adam. You kind of have to suss it out for yourself, right? But I like how you're sort of organizing yourself to make sure that the tasks that are important are covered, right? Because it's
Right.
very easy to fall into doing busy work.
Mm,
That's the thing that I learned 6 8 months into it, that I was spending a lot of time and energy doing things that weren't necessarily moving the needle on my business.
right.
And those are things to important to audit, I would say, every quarter, right? I mean, I'm not a big one for 5 year plans when you're a solopreneur, right? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of next quarter. These days,
Right.
we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, leave alone, at the end of
Yeah.
the week. So
Yeah. Very good
things are
point.
changing rapidly. Um, Now, the other thing I want to touch on is you mentioned creating a new norm about using metaphysical data, I think you said, in everyday decisions, right? Now, that's a
Right.
big mission. But
Yeah.
you're also trying to book clients, pay bills, like you just said, sort of balance your overheads, your expenses. So, how do you balance the visionary stuff with the practical, I need to eat reality?
Oh, yes, that is a great point, and it is one thing that I am balancing for sure, and that it I would say plays into your previous question on sort of the frameworks, what's working, what's not, what do I need to improve. But for me, I am selecting very intentionally my points of engaging an audience or becoming more public or refining a skill so I can do the next move
Right.
or um, making sure any kind of resource that's needed to scale is worked on. So, finances or technology or a relationship of some kind. And so at the moment, I'm keeping tabs and organizing all these different engagement points
Yeah.
that will help me in the long term create more leverage where eventually they will sort of collide and come to a point where I can start to really make a difference in my vision of creating the new norm because I'm also seeing uh, for example, I'm helping someone who's also a friend of mine who does foresight and she came to me and was like, "Wow, Adam, you are sort of in a great moment because she's noticing that younger generations are how do I want to put it? Are approaching religion in a different way.
Yeah.
And so the metaphysical, the intuitive community, resources, language, concepts seem to be resonating a little bit more or less, with younger generations. And I was like, I don't know. I just was at the right time at the right moment, but it's another sort of interesting point that I'm tracking on how I can sort of make my vision a reality.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think that's a smart way to do it because I think it's important to have a bigger, sort of bolder vision that is much more long term. But at the same time, it shouldn't derail your day to day, right? The pieces ultimately lead you there, but you have to build sort of the stepping stones to get there. So I think
Right.
that's important. It's not one or the other. Um, so if we were to grab a coffee 3 years from now, Adam, what would you want to have achieved? Where would you want to be?
Oh, yeah. Well, as long it's dark roast and with cream, we'll start there. And then once we have the coffee good to go, I think what I would love to have achieved is a fully functioning running business. Not saying I don't have it already, but it is definitely um doing a lot at the moment. And
Yeah,
so having some kind of sustainable where the business sort of runs without me would be nice, and that would be a great achievement. I think also starting to have more public conversations that reach more of the common household would also be thrilling to talk with you about. I do realize that my vision is, I would say, a high bar. Creating a new norm is not easy.
yeah.
But I know the world is changing, and so I think that will be helpful, but I think creating various touch points, whether it's like a TEDx talk or some sort of partnership with someone or, a book I've also been thinking about where it leaves a mark and it's sort of a legacy, if you will, for the next generation to consider, to think about, and maybe even take on. I think that would be great, and even start to start to scale my business, whether it's with groups, because right now I'm just doing more one-to-ones, and I
Yeah.
think that would be also a great conversation to have. But as long as you bring some good coffee, Nikhil, I'm up for it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a coffee aficionado, but I know people who will be able to guide me on that front. So, but
Perfect.
I'll just ask you for the right beans to bring.
Oh, I'm
Um,
up for that.
yeah. And so, but no, I love what you said though, because I think you're right. It's also, and I would say patience is really important, right, with what you're doing, because I think it's important work. I agree with your friend that I think just this generation is much more attuned and open to sort of spirituality versus organized religion.
Mm,
But there's also an educational component in what you're doing, right? So I think it's important to sort of stay the course and not lose faith
mm.
um, in the short term. So that's what I would tell you. I think it's worth doing.
Yeah, I like that.
And so let me ask you now, if someone's sitting in their government cubicle right now, feeling sort of miserable, listening to this episode and thinking about making the leap, what's one thing you'd tell them?
Yeah, I would tell them that if your day-to-day job is not exciting you and not lighting you up where you feel fully engaged in the mission or the purpose that you're doing, I think that is reason to take pause and reconsider how you're spending your days. And for me, I suggest that advice tip because I've recently experienced some family loss. And to me, when you have a personal relationship leave you, it can really remind you of what's important. And at the moment, I think spending your days where what you want to do and that really lights you up, I think is one of the most important things. So I think just considering, is this really what I want to do from a
Yeah.
day to day? And if is it the best use of my time? Because that's really all we have.
True, and we don't have a lot. And I'm sorry for your loss. And you're right. It's time is the most precious commodity, and it's the only one you can't ever get back. So yeah, I think that's great advice. So,
Yeah.
is there anything you'd like to share that we haven't covered share with our listeners that we haven't covered, Adam?
Yeah, I think for me, if for your listeners, especially if you're a new solopreneur, I would suggest that you heavily lean on the experiences that you have had because it's when you take a moment to realize that the journey that you're on and where you've been, there's some intentionality and there's a reason of where you're at in this current moment. And because of that sort of reflection moment, you can really continue forward when things aren't really going well.
Yeah.
And it's it's gonna happen and that's fine. But for me, and what I could share with your audience is that it's trusting yourself, and I think that's really key, and what I also try to impart on others is that when you know what you're doing, it just makes things easier,
Yeah.
and when you really start to trust yourself, being a solopreneur, it's scary, of course, but just navigate it from day to day and enjoy it, but realize that it's gonna be okay, and that's sort of the approach I've had thus far.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice because you're right. One of the hardest transitions is that loss of identity, right? Which was attached to a title and attached to a corporation or a government entity, and you suddenly feel sort of unmoored. So I think you're right. And I would also say call Adam and speak to
Yeah,
him.
I'd be happy to help you trust yourself more.
So that's a great way to go to our rapid fire round. So I'm just going to throw 5 fun questions at you and
Okay.
give us whatever comes to mind. So your FBI code name for your solopreneur journey, what would it be?
Oh gosh. Uh, I would say Speedy Gonzalez.
I
I
like
I you could actually ask some former colleagues of mine. I was constantly churning out assessments, publishing assessments, and doing a lot of projects all at once. And I'm just like quick, 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 quick. Got on, was really great at it. But I would say my FBI, yeah, call sign would probably be Speedy Gonzalez because I would just jump at the opportunity and try to solve it as quickly as possible.
I love that. We're just missing the hat, Adam. So
I know, I need one of those.
yeah, could be a trademark.
Yeah, there
Um,
you go.
Talking about your former colleagues, explain the Akashic records to your most skeptical FBI colleague in one sentence. Go.
Oh my. I would say to my most skeptic colleague, this is what I would say to him or her. The Akashic records are a way to know how your assessment makes sense when all the logical points don't line up. It is a way to refine and acknowledge your inner knowing of what you think may be true.
I love that, and bravo, well done under pressure, Adam.
I hope that's helpful.
That was great. What is one thing TV shows get completely wrong about being an intelligence analyst?
Oh, that I'm an agent. Meaning a lot of TV shows, especially about the FBI generally, is that all the main players are agents, and which is fine, which is great, and it's needed, but a lot of the times, a lot of the organization and strategy can be done and is done by an analyst, and their job is to support agents figure out their next steps.
Yeah, and they're sort of like the writers behind the shows, right? They never get the credit, but without them, there wouldn't be a show.
That's
So,
right.
yeah. So, what is one classified secret you can tell us about how you stay calm under pressure?
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad you switched that up at the end. I would say one thing that I do to stay calm is navigating the energy within my body. So, for example, when I started to get onto this podcast and talk to you, you don't know this, but internally, when I have nerves, I will observe in my body where that tension is and then let it fall and release. So, similarly, when some other kind of uncomfortable situation occurs, I will just start to be more present in the moment and notice any sort of tension that's happening, and then just appreciate it and then let it go its way.
That's great, and I sincerely hope your nerves were calm through this because you were great. I would not have known you had any
Oh,
nerves.
good. Yeah, well, yeah, I'm glad it's coming off that way, but yeah, definitely nervous on my end.
It absolutely is. Now, so you're building Starfleet intelligence. Which Star Trek captain's leadership style do you most embody and why? Kirk, Picard, Cisco, or Janeway?
Oh my goodness. I would probably say Picard because I definitely relate to the trailblazer type, the thinking outside the box and creating sort of that next generation of no pun intended, but like the way of pushing boundaries. I definitely can relate to that, and I hope that characterizes Picard in the best way possible, or at least my point of view from watching the show.
I think he would be happy with that assessment. And he's
Okay,
my
good.
favorite too, incidentally. So we're on the
Okay,
same
good.
page. Well, Adam, that's a great way to end the show. So thank you so much for your time and for, bringing nerves and all and sharing so much wisdom with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it was a blast.
There are a few important lessons from Adam's journey that apply to anyone building a solo business, no matter what stage you're at. First, positioning tension isn't a problem to solve, it's your differentiator. I see this pattern constantly in solopreneurs who come from serious careers. They think clarity comes purely from subtraction when it can often come from integration. Adam could have hidden the Akashic Records piece to make his positioning easier, but that tension between FBI analyst and metaphysical practitioner is precisely what makes him memorable. If you're struggling to describe what you do because it feels like you're straddling two worlds, ask yourself this: am I making it simpler for me to explain? Or am I diluting what actually makes me unique? Often, the thing you are most afraid to put on your homepage is the exact reason a client will hire you. Second, and this is critical, your past experience transfers in ways you haven't recognized yet. Adam wasn't struggling because he lacked skills. He struggled because, like so many solopreneurs, he initially couldn't yet see how his expertise fit outside the environment where it was formed. If you're coming from corporate or government, the question isn't whether your previous career is relevant. It's whether you've taken the time to translate those skills into your current business. What frameworks did you use in your previous work? And if you can't name them, what decisions were you trusted to make over and over again? Third, content creation paralysis is real, especially when you're coming from a world with completely different communication rules. Adam struggled with LinkedIn, trying to figure out hooks, funnel stages, message strategy is something I see constantly with experienced professionals. Here's the truth: you can't optimize your way into finding your voice. You have to write your way into it. Yes, learn the basics, but then give yourself permission to start creating in your voice, sharing your lived experience, not a performance of what you think good content looks like. The mechanical perfection comes later, if it even matters. Right now, your audience needs to see that you understand their world, and that only comes through when you stop performing and start communicating. Finally, and this is a big one, decision making as a solopreneur cannot rely on one input alone. Adam talked about using frameworks, assumptions, red hat analysis, and intuition together. That's not mystical, that's disciplined. In your business, you need guardrails and gut. If you're only logical, you stall. If you're only intuitive, you drift. The leverage comes from integrating both. This week, write down two parts of your experience that feel hardest to explain together. Don't fix them, don't reword them, just name them. Then ask yourself, which one am I currently muting to feel safer? And what is that costing me in momentum, clarity, or clients? Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If this conversation surfaced tension in how you describe what you do or made you realize you're underselling parts of your experience, this is exactly the kind of problem we work on in a brand clarity session. Book yours at clarity.boostsolo.com or through the link in the show notes. Until next time, keep breaking free from the corporate grind. And remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.